They called him a dreamer, a man too far ahead of his time. But what if I told you that this dreamer saw the future of an entire continent before the world even knew what freedom truly meant? Kwame Nkrumah was not born into power, he was born into struggle. In 1909, on the golden soil of Nkroful, a small village in the Gold Coast, a young boy looked at the sky and asked one question that would change Africa forever. Why must my people live like prisoners in their own land? From the start, Nkrumah's heart was wired for rebellion, not the kind that burns buildings, but the kind that builds nations. He walked miles barefoot just to learn under the dim light of colonial classrooms, where every book whispered the same lie, that Africa's greatness was history, never the future. But Nkrumah didn't believe that. He looked at those lies and said, if they can write history to erase us, I'll write history to remind them who we are. Years later, he found himself in the heart of America at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, surrounded by new ideas, new power, new hope. There, he studied not just philosophy or economics, but freedom itself. He read about George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Marcus Garvey, men who turned oppression into revolution. And deep inside, he whispered to himself, one day, Africa will have her own Washington. But the truth no one tells you is this: Nkrumah wasn't inspired by America's power, he was inspired by its people's courage. He saw how even the oppressed fought for rights on U.S. soil, and he realized freedom doesn't come from the powerful, it comes from those who refuse to remain powerless. So when he returned home, he wasn't the same man. He didn't return as a scholar, he returned as a storm that carried one message: seek ye first the political kingdom, and all else shall be added unto you. They called him a radical. They said he wanted too much too soon. But tell me, when your people have been chained for centuries, how can freedom ever be too soon? He built schools when others built prisons. He built hope when others built walls. He believed that Africa didn't need to beg, it needed to believe. But the more he rose, the more enemies grew around him. Foreign powers watched closely. Local leaders whispered behind his back. They feared his dream because his dream was too big to control. And yet through it all, Nkrumah smiled because he knew something no one else did. You cannot imprison an idea whose time has come. And here's the truth most people never hear. Nkrumah didn't fight for fame or for power. He fought because he believed that a mind once freed can never be enslaved again. As he once said, we face neither east nor west, we face forward. Those words weren't just political, they were prophetic. Because while the world was divided by ideologies, Nkrumah dreamed of unity, of one Africa standing tall under one flag, with one heart, one voice, one destiny. And that dream began to take shape.
But dreams, especially dangerous ones, come with a price. The question is, when the dreamer becomes the threat, who decides what freedom truly means? They celebrated him once. Crowds filled the streets of Accra, waving flags, singing his name, Nkrumah, 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 the son of a farmer, had become the father of a nation, Ghana, the first African country to break free from colonial chains. It was 1957, and the world stood still to witness a miracle. But miracles, my friend, have enemies, especially when they threaten profit. While the people saw freedom, others saw loss, loss of control, loss of resources, loss of influence. And so a quiet war began, not with guns, but with whispers, not on battlefields, but in boardrooms. The CIA called it containment. Nkrumah called it betrayal, because while he dreamed of a united Africa, the West feared another Soviet Africa. They painted him red, labeled him a communist, a puppet of Moscow. But here's the truth no one tells. Kwame Nkrumah was not loyal to the East or the West. He was loyal to Africa. He once said, "We prefer self-government with danger to servitude in tranquility." That line scared the powerful because it meant Africa would no longer kneel. But power never surrenders quietly. So they used his own people against him. Politicians he trusted, soldiers he fed, voices he raised. And little by little, the dream he built began to crumble from within. Inflation grew, corruption whispered, doubt spread. And while the world called him dictator, few knew the full story. Yes, he made mistakes. He centralized power. He silenced critics. But what they never mention is that every empire that ever stood against colonial power had to stand alone. Nkrumah was building something no African had ever built before, a future without foreign masters.
And that's when the trap closed. In 1966, while he was on a peace mission to Vietnam, the coup began. His own military, trained and funded by Western powers, overthrew him. They stormed the palace, tore down his statue, burned his book. They called it liberation. But liberation from what? From one man's dream? Or from the fear that Africa might actually unite? They told the people, you are free now, but the invisible chains remained: debt, dependency, division. And as Nkrumah sat in exile, far from the land he gave his soul to, he wrote in silence, revolutions are brought about by men who think as men of action and act as men of thought. They had taken his title, they had taken his country, but they could never take his conviction. Because Nkrumah didn't lose power, he passed it on to every young African who still believes that unity is not a fantasy, to every voice that refuses to die quietly, to every generation that knows freedom without unity is just another illusion. And here's a truth history rarely speaks of. Even after his fall, countries he helped liberate still sought his counsel in secret. Even in exile, world leaders wrote to him. Why? Because they knew the man they called a dictator was in truth a visionary too early for his time. And perhaps that is the curse of greatness. When you see what others cannot, they call you dangerous. When you build beyond borders, they call you a threat. And when you love your people more than their profits, they make sure the world forgets your name.
They thought it was over. They thought exile would silence him, that time would erase his name. But how do you silence a man whose voice has already become a heartbeat? How do you bury a dream that refuses to die? Kwame Nkrumah was gone from Ghana, but Ghana was never gone from him. In his quiet home in Conakry, Guinea, far from the land he once led, he sat surrounded by books, by letters from students, workers, and believers who still called him comrade president. The world forgot him, but the people never did. He spent his final years not plotting revenge, but writing vision, blueprint for a continent still waiting to rise. He wrote of Pan-African unity, of economic independence, of science, of self-belief. He wrote with the fire of a man who knew he might never see his dream come true, but believed someone someday would. And here's a truth they never told you. Even in exile, he wasn't alone. Fidel Castro visited him. Julius Nyerere praised him. Leaders across Africa quietly followed his path because deep down, they all knew Kwame Nkrumah didn't fail, he planted. And the seeds he planted are still growing today. Every time an African youth speaks about innovation, every time a nation stands against exploitation, every time someone says, we can stand on our own, that's Nkrumah whispering through generations. He didn't need a throne to rule. He didn't need an army to lead, because true power doesn't come from titles. It comes from truth. When Nkrumah passed away in 1972, they buried his body, but not his dream. In the years that followed, one by one, African nations began to honor him again. His books were republished, his speeches studied, and slowly the world began to realize this man they once called too radical was actually too right. The same ideas that frightened empires became the same ideas now taught in universities. The same man they overthrew became a symbol of what Africa could still become. And that's the mystery of time. It always finds justice for those who spoke the truth when it wasn't popular. Today, when we talk about leadership, when we talk about courage, when we talk about a world free from fear and manipulation, we are living inside the shadow of men like him. Because Nkrumah didn't fight for power, he fought for purpose. And purpose never dies. He dreamed of one Africa, not divided by borders, but united by belief. An Africa that trades with itself, educates itself, heals itself. And maybe, just maybe, that dream is finally beginning to return. Kwame Nkrumah once said, "The forces that unite us are intrinsic and greater than the superimposed influences that keep us apart." And that's not just Africa's story, it's our story. Because no matter where you come from, Ghana, America, or anywhere on this planet. Freedom is not given, it's earned. The world still needs dreamers who dare to be misunderstood. The world still needs voices that refuse to be silent. The world still needs the courage to stand up and say, we face neither east nor west, we face forward. So if you ever feel forgotten, if you ever feel like your voice doesn't matter, remember Nkrumah, the man who lost everything, yet gave the world a dream it's still chasing. Because the real revolution never ends. It just waits for the next believer to arrive. History doesn't belong to those who conquered. It belongs to those who dared to dream, even when the world called them crazy.